So remember that the medial temporal lobes, right? The middle of our temporal lobes going from front to back, from anterior to posterior, including the hippocampus and some of these regions around the hippocampus, appear to be pretty important for declarative memory function, right? For also explicit memory, function. The same sort of thing with an emphasis on consciousness. Remember Daniel Schacter's term. For episodic memory, right? For memories for specific episodes where you're present and you can sort of, experience, what's happening now in reference to what's happened in, similar circumstances before, for example. Yet damage to these regions, which results in, loss of declarative or explicit or episodic memory, and amnesia, right? Does not seem to directly impact anyway, the kind of development of procedural or implicit memories, right? We could test that in animals. Remember with the macaque, the lifesaver task, for example, it got better and better, at removing the lifesaver from the bent, coat hanger. And then in HM as well, right? When he was tested with the mirror drawing task, he would get better and better at that task, even though he had no explicit, episodic declarative memory, for any of the actual learning episodes where he was acquiring that particular procedure or skill. So what's interesting is that procedural or implicit memory seems to depend on other networks or other regions of the brain. And I was going to show you really quick, because this is a coronal slice, right, of a human brain. It goes like this, so it's pulled out this way. And if you can see right here, this is like, let's see how well we can see this. The medial temporal lobes are right in here. So that's the hippocampus right in there. I mean, it's a slice through the hippocampus, right? Let's see if I can get this just well done here. Okay. And here's the other, hippocampus on the other side. So these two regions were removed, from HM going forward and back, anterior, posterior. And then some very important regions that are involved in procedural or implicit memory are actually components of what are known as the basal ganglia. And I wanted to show you these. These are subcortical nuclei. They're located below the level of the cortex. They're heavily interlinked with each other. It turns out they get a lot of input, from networks in the frontal lobe that are involved in planning, and execution of behavior. And then they pass through these nuclei. They pass through them in a series of, sort of circuits. One of them is really much like an accelerator, and one is sort of more like a brake. And there's a couple of different ways that information sort of transits through. And then it works its way back, networked back, through, neural networks back via the thalamus, because that, processes ascending information to cortex, right? And then back into, primary motor cortex in the frontal lobe. Remember that pre-central gyrus in the frontal lobe, where you've got a homuncular mapping of the opposite half of the body to sort of move it around. So the basal ganglia are really important for the planning, execution, particularly like the timing of movements, the initiation of movements, the stopping of movements. And also, it turns out really interestingly, the sort of speed or rate of thoughts and the initiation of thoughts and, the cessation of thoughts as well. And there's a whole series of these nuclei. And I was just going to show you, there's one that's called the Caudate Nucleus. And let's see if you can see it. So here's these two spaces that are here. These are called the Lateral Ventricles. And right on the edge here, you can see some gray matter right there and right there. That's the caudate. It's actually a tail-like. Caudal means tail. And it sort of extends and, forward back and drapes over, the thalamus. And then here you can sort of see there's a darkening right there. That's another nucleus that's called the putamen, which is this darker one here. And then there's a paler little piece of it right there, a paler nucleus here that's called the Globus Pallidus, which means the pale globe. But these are all components, basically, of what are called the basal ganglia, a set of subcortical interconnected nuclei that are, communicated with by frontal regions of the brain, for example, and other areas of the brain too, and then, send information through that network, and then back to cortex, via the thalamus, which does that initial processing before distributing this information, onto cortex, and damage to the basal ganglia, particularly a subset of basal ganglia nuclei that actually have all these white matter projections sort of passing through them. And they're interconnected by these sort of white matter connections too. So they have this kind of white matter, like white striped appearance, right? So it's a subset of the nuclei in the basal ganglia that are called the striped nuclei. They're called the striatum, is what they're referred to as. Appear to be really critically involved in our access, or our ability to acquire procedural and implicit skills. So if you're going to acquire the ability to ride a bicycle or to play an instrument, or acquire a lot of other procedural skills that we'll talk more about when we meet in our class, networks in the basal ganglia, in the striatum, are going to be important. They have to change and alter, to get these kinds of skills kind of down. So another area of the brain that also appears to contribute to procedural memories in many cases is, where most of the neurons in our brain are actually localized, right? In this great big structure off the back that's actually referred to as the little brain, right? Called the cerebellum. So, again, declarative, explicit episodic memories, memories for facts and events, for specific episodes in your life, your conscious engagement with, I was here and I remember having breakfast and this is what I ate and that was the person that was there. That all appears to depend more significantly on these medial temporal lobe regions like the hippocampus and areas that are linked to it. While, your skills, your habits, your procedural memories, your implicit memories, these depend much more on subcortical regions, including the striatum, the subset of nuclei in the basal ganglia that are important for the timing of movement and the initiation and the stopping of movement and thoughts, and also the 69 billion neurons that are found in the structure off the back known as the cerebellum.